Assalamualaikum Dr. Aini. My name is ATIQAH binti HASSAN. Me and my group members will presented about the roles of valuer. In this slide, I would like to explain what is land acquisition. Land acquisition is a legal process in which the government take possession of land for public use and pay the owner with the amount of ringgit compensation. According to the Land Acquisition of Act 1916, this act relates to the land acquisition, assessing compensation to account for such acquisition and other incidental matters. In addition, this act was passed by the Seri Paduka Baginda Yang di-Pertuan Agong with the help and consent of Dewan Rakyat dan Dewan Negara. The authority also has passed it. The Land Acquisition Act 1916 is the legislation that controls property owner's right in Malaysia. A government, a private owner, or maybe an individual or a company cannot simply buy the land. It is because the land is a form of matter and subject to the jurisdiction of the state in which it's located. There are many processes to do before getting the land in land acquisition. The state authority can acquire land for any public use. It is also include the technique to perform the land acquisition manners and the way tough acquisition lawsuits, and ultimately the evaluation method of good enough repayment. We move to the next slide, which is what is a valuer. A valuer is a professional person and knowledgeable in property terms to determine the property price with their skill. They execute feasibility studies and provide expert advice to those people who need it on property related to real estate. A valuer also is someone who works in the real estate industry. The valuer also will determine the interpreted market force. As a valuer, they will also decide the property value based on the surrounding area of the property, or in other words, we call it as a market condition. The valuer usually should follow the essential purpose for financing and facilitation or other statutory purposes, and also needed for acquisition and disposal of property. The 6th edition of Malaysian Standard stated that the only registered valuer should carry out valuation and provide such service for a fee. Malaysian Appraisal Standard 1 about valuer qualification and conflict of interest assure that only one valuer with the necessary knowledge, ability and competence can do valuation properly. It is provided for under the Valuation Appraiser, Estate Agent and Property Managers Act 1981 as amended. Previously, it was said that a property valuer could work in both, which is in public and private sectors. Their positions are pretty similar regarding who appoints them and what they are expected to perform. But there are a few critical variants. For example, suppose a person hire a valuer in the first step of acquiring land. In that case, they may use the valuer as an assessor in the court cases. Therefore, a private and public valuer play different roles in two scenarios during an inquiry and in court proceeding. For the public valuer, a valuer will also determine the value of a property based on current market condition. The valuer is also required for financing and facilities, taxation or other statutory purposes, investment or other business management activities, and the acquisition and disposition of the property. The inspection is used to verify the suitability of a property for government inspection. Valuer must complete inspecting the land as it pertains to the government. Measurements are used to calculate the size of the land that will acquired. The valuer must develop a list of the land to be presented to the authorities. Before acquiring land, it is necessary to conduct a land inspection to ensure that the terrain is suitable for the future development. The inspection process also requires knowledge of the land zoning. For example, suppose that the land is zoned for agriculture and the government wants to build a building. In that case, it must go through the process of land conversion. So a valuer must be hired to assess the land and write a report that includes all of the present condition of the land. Next is the roles of valuer in land acquisition is an advisor for the landowner. The landowner needs to hire a valuer to help with the land valuation, which give the right and suitable amount for the land. It will help the landowner decide which is to accept or not to accept the value of the land. As we know, valuer are divided into two sectors, which is the public valuer and also the private valuer. While public valuer assists the government in property acquisition, private valuer determine the land value for the clients. In this circumstance, a private sector valuer will be hired to advise the landowner. Then, before giving their opinion and advising to their client, a valuer responsible for advising the landowner must have a lot of experience, expertise in advertising, and much practice as a valuer. It is necessary to ensure that the landowner accept all the opinions and value. As a valuer, they must also obey the Land Acquisition Act of 1986 when making decision and giving recommendation to the landowner. The valuer advise the landowner how much compensation to pay for their land. They need to assess the location, land usage, and characteristic, terms and conditions, and assess the market value. The market value cannot be calculated with the mathematical method or another formula. After all, the property is not the same as the previous owner's property. For the court case example, according to Bertam Consolidated Rubber Co. Ltd versus Pemungutan Hasil Tanah Seberang Perak Utara, Batuan, their charge Helpworth J said that the valuation is never a strictly quantitative process. For example, that distant potential development value is sometimes difficult to evaluate the absence of the vast database collected from similar land purchases in the past. However, the data is frequently overwhelming and it finally comes down to a matter of personal opinion and based on experience. So that's all from me. Thank you.
So before attending the inquiry event, the valuer was obligated to write a comprehensive valuation report. And next, it's to determine the compensation for those affected. The valuer will assist in determining how much money should be lost from a deposit. Next, the valuer must complete the award under Section 14 until the land administrator is satisfied and agrees to fill out Form G. Then the valuer needs to determine how much consideration each individual has been interfered with. Next, the valuation report should contain the date of valuation and the date of inspection, and then if there are any restriction on development, they should be indicated in the land's boundaries and legal details. Next, development's description includes a home, pool, or other building. The set plan depicts the developments of the borders and development's correct floor layout. Next, under the current applicable environmental planning instrument or local government rules, the overview of permissible land uses is provided. Then a description of land, value class, the existing and future uses of the land, and the location of the land. Next, the sales and rental information details were used to form the valuation, analysis, and calculations. Next, the list of compensations determined following Section 55 of the Land Purchase legislation. For the court case between Uda Holding Berhad and Malewa Leisure Sdn Berhad, so in this case, proposed compensation of 382,000 to the plaintiff and sum of 8.4 million ringgit to the defendant. So in this case, the court will assign a registered valuer from the public sector to attend the land application hearing in court as an assessor if the applicant objects to the court's compensation. So he may justify his valuation if it differs from the private valuer and admit that his proof is more realistic and refers to the concept. Okay, for Yap Sin Tai and Hulu Langat Land Administrator, in this case, in court, the public valuer competes with the private valuer to show the judge that all relevant criteria were considered. And when a judge makes a judgment, the government valuer has to show that their material factors and all other relevant considerations were considered. And role as a valuation expert is limited to assisting the court, a party involved in a dispute or an individual seeking compensation. The valuer also need to know that what you are up against where before you go up against the higher court in objection regarding the amount of compensation being given. For example, suppose the applicant is still dissatisfied with the amount of compensation after filing the first land application with the court. In that case, all parties, including the valuer, should be aware that the decision made by the court judge is final. Also, no further appeal to a higher court can be filed against it. So, in addition, valuers also play roles as an expert witness in a court. A valuer who wish to testify in court must have extensive expertise and knowledge. It is because the valuer must have thorough understanding of court processes and the working of the legal system to serve as an expert witness. So not just that, in additional, the value evidence must be consistent and follow the valuation report to prevent inaccurate information. And finally, the testimony must be presented accurately with care and precision. As we previously stated, the value industry is split into two sectors, public and private. Because of this, a public sector valuer is an expert witness for the government, and the private sector valuer is an expert witness for their client to prevent fraud or decrease values.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. My name is Ahmad bin ZAHID 2021-393-477. So for this assignment, I'm going to present about roles of the private valuer. The first role is they must prepare a valuation report and represent them during the acquisition process. A private valuer can approach any valuation firm and submit a formal written request to be appointed as an acquisition-focused valuer. So, an appointed valuer can assist the landlord in presenting the valuation report that they prepared during the inquiry event in the hope of securing a significant settlement sum for the property. However, the valuer's role begins after he is granted permission by the landowner to enter the scheduled land and collect data, in addition to conducting inspections and also surveys. The second rule is they must act solely on behalf of the parties involved in a particular transaction. So, the valuer's action will be directed by the reason he was chosen to this job. In the event of an objection, his presence before a higher court may not involve any discussion of the appropriate amount of compensation unless he directly demands it. So as a result, it is critical to interact with all parties engaged in the first land application filed with the court. Additionally, the ultimate decision of the court judge may be challenged only to a higher court, which should be done during the original land application to the court. For the next role, they must compile the proposed land acquisition plan. So, acquisition plans must be truly analyzed to understand the acquisition's characteristics, such as its aim. Information is gathered on the scheduled land, such as its zoning, document of ownership, location, and also size of the land. The valuer will then look for comparable land in the immediate vicinity and use the comparative approach to determine the market value. To determine the market value, the appraiser must compare it to a recent transaction that occurred after the date of evaluation. Next roles of private valuer is presents the sum for assessment and approval. So the valuer will check the scheduled land and record the inspection date. And the valuer will be on the lookout for any minor factor that might be utilized to justify an increase in market value, such as the topography and also the surrounding region. It is necessary to understand that as a private valuer acting on behalf of the proprietor, it is your job to determine the fair market value of the scheduled land. Then, the private valuer must prepare a valuation report for the scheduled land. Valuation report is submitted to the register valuer for verification and approval of the value. After the approval, the valuer should compile all pertinent papers and evidence for presentation during the inquiry. Next, the private valuer must help the applicant with further objections or court applications. According to Section 37 of the Land Acquisition Act 1960, the applicant may object for 4 grounds, including the measurement of the property, the amount of compensation, the parties to whom it is payable, and the distribution of compensation. The private valuer will assist the applicant in determining the source of their complaint and subsequently ensure that the applicant completes upon end, which is application that an objection be referred to court. And additionally, the valuer must be mindful of the court date by ensuring that he and the petitioner are present throughout the process.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is IKMAL HAMDI bin AMINUDDIN. And for next is first is the court appoint a private appraiser to generate a valuation report presented to the parties before being designated as an assessor. The judge must first summon the person to appear in the court. A combined decision is not conceivable because the judge can only choose the amount from each assessor. Next, we will go into the court case between Muhammad Shah versus Kabitana, Kottabaru. In this case, a private valuer has been hired to create a valuation report supporting the landowner appeal against the amount of the compensation offered for his seized land. He had filed 2 appeals but was yet not be get compensation for the structure erected at Majlis Pembenaran Kottabaru. In this High Court, a judge will decide whether to keep or amend the compensation. So next we will get into the role of valuer as an expert witness. So expert witness are expected to give a court scientific technical information that is likely beyond the expertise and knowledge of the presiding judge. An impartial witness must be speaking the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. An expert witness' opinion must not contradict others' evidence to be accepted and acted upon by a court. So next we will go to the conclusion. That is, the land valuers play an important role in the land purchase. They play an important role in preparing value reports and representing the landowners during the purchase process. Their major responsibility is to determine a reasonable amount of remuneration for applicant. Due to this knowledge also, land purchase techniques usually involve at least 4 values. Initially, the initial reimbursement amount will be determined by JPH valuers.